February 1945. The Pacific is burning. America is winning. But winning is costing everything. Every island, every beach, every ridge. Bodies, thousands of them. Young men, barely 20, gone before breakfast. The Japanese aren't surrendering. They're disappearing into the earth, into tunnels, into rock, into darkness, and waiting. Washington needs a solution. Fast. The war in Europe is ending. But the Pacific is a different kind of hell. It doesn't end. It just gets louder. Someone pulls out a map. There it is. A tiny volcanic island. 8 square miles. Shaped like a pork chop. Barely visible. Barely worth a name. Iwo Jima. Population. Soldiers. Purpose. Radar stations and airstrips. Strategic value. Debatable. Human cost. Unimaginable. The generals stare at the map. They calculate. They project. They estimate the battle will last 10 days. Maybe less. The island is small. The logic seems clean. It isn't. Nothing about Iwo Jima is clean. 21,000 Japanese soldiers are already there. They've been there for months. Digging. Building. 18 miles of tunnels carved directly into volcanic rock. Hidden artillery. Concealed bunkers. Overlapping fields of fire designed for one purpose, to make every inch of that beach a killing ground. General Kuribayashi isn't defending Iwo Jima to win. He's defending it to bleed America dry, to slow the machine, to make the cost of invasion so catastrophic that Washington would hesitate before the next island, before the mainland. He's not fighting a battle. He's building a psychological weapon. And Washington is walking straight into it. But here's what no one says out loud. Here's the question buried under the strategy briefings and the projected casualty numbers and the medals not yet given. Did America even need Iwo Jima? That question will haunt every man who survived it, every family who didn't, every historian who came after. Because the arguments for taking Iwo Jima were not wrong. They were just incomplete. The island sat between the B-29 bases in the Mariana Islands and the Japanese mainland. Japanese radar on Iwo Jima was warning Tokyo of incoming American bombers. That early warning system was costing lives. American lives. Pilots. Crews. Men who never made it back. Taking Iwo Jima would eliminate that radar. It would give American fighters a base close enough to escort the bombers. It would provide an emergency landing strip for damaged aircraft returning from Japan. The math looked sound. But math doesn't bleed. 26,000 American casualties. Nearly 7,000 dead. The bloodiest battle in Marine Corps history. Fought on an island that post-war analysis would quietly, devastatingly suggest was perhaps not as strategically essential as believed. Some historians would argue the B-29s were already hitting Japan effectively. That the fighter escort theory was never fully realized. That the emergency landings, while real, may not have justified the price. And yet, the Marines couldn't know that in February 1945. They had orders. They had a beach. They had 36 days of the worst fighting the Pacific had ever seen. They couldn't afford doubt. Doubt gets you killed faster than bullets. So they loaded the landing craft. They checked their rifles. They looked at the black volcanic sand waiting for them, and they said nothing. Because there was nothing to say. The island was ahead. The order was given. And the dying began. Something doesn't add up. The beach is quiet. Too quiet. February 19th. Thousands of Marines hit the sand. Waves of landing craft. Engines roaring. Men screaming orders. The largest naval bombardment in Pacific history had just ended. 3 days of shells. Rockets. Bombs. Relentless. Crushing. Enough firepower to flatten a city. And yet, no resistance. The first wave lands. Nothing. Second wave. Still nothing. The men look at each other. Confused. Relieved. Suspicious. Veterans know this feeling. It's the feeling before everything goes wrong. They push inland. Slowly, the black volcanic sand grabs their boots like wet concrete. Every step costs energy. Every step costs time. The terrain is wrong. The air smells like sulfur, like something ancient and angry buried just beneath the surface. Then the guns open up, all at once, from everywhere, from nowhere. Kuribayashi had ordered his men to wait, to let the beaches fill, to let the Americans feel safe for exactly long enough. Then, everything simultaneously. Artillery from Mount Suribachi, machine guns from concealed bunkers, mortars from tunnels invisible to any aerial photograph. The beach becomes a slaughterhouse in minutes. But here's what haunts the strategists. Here's the detail that doesn't fit the official narrative. The Americans knew the tunnels existed. Intelligence had reported them. Aerial reconnaissance had spotted construction. Military planners had estimated Kuribayashi's defensive strategy weeks before the landing. They knew. And they came anyway. Why? Because stopping wasn't an option. Because the machinery of war doesn't reverse easily. Because thousands of men, hundreds of ships, months of planning, momentum doesn't stop for doubt. But someone knew the 10-day estimate was wrong. Someone in a quiet room looked at the tunnel reports and did different math. Darker math. That person said nothing, or said something and wasn't heard, or was heard and overruled. We'll never know which. What we know is this. The Marines on that beach had no idea what was underneath them. 18 miles of tunnels, hospitals, ammunition depots, command centers, an entire fortress built inside a volcano. They weren't just fighting an enemy above ground. They were fighting one that had become the island itself. And the island was patient. Kuribayashi had studied America. Not just its military, its psychology, its media, its hunger for quick victories and clean narratives. He understood something that most Japanese commanders refused to accept. Japan could not win this war conventionally. The naval power was gone. Midway had broken it. The air superiority was shattered. The supply lines were bleeding out. Every island that fell brought American bombers closer to Tokyo, closer to the emperor, closer to the end. But Kuribayashi wasn't thinking about winning. He was thinking about cost. If Japan could make every island expensive enough, if every beach could be turned into a nightmare, if every American mother opened a newspaper and saw casualty numbers that made her stomach drop, maybe Washington would hesitate. Maybe the political will would fracture. Maybe a negotiated peace was still possible. It was a cold calculation. Ruthless, precise, almost admirable in its terrible logic. So he built accordingly. He overruled his own officers. Traditional Japanese doctrine demanded a beach defense. Stop the enemy at the water. Die gloriously at the shoreline. Kuribayashi rejected it entirely. He pulled his forces back, dug them in, created layered defensive positions designed not to stop the Americans but to grind them. Slowly, methodically, painfully, every bunker was connected to the tunnel network. If one position was destroyed, soldiers disappeared underground and re-emerged somewhere else. The Americans would clear a ridge, move forward, and take fire from a position they had already passed. From behind, from below, from inside the rock itself. It was psychological warfare built into the architecture of the island. But here's the strategic paradox. Here's where the American planners had their own ruthless logic. Admiral Chester Nimitz needed the Pacific campaign to keep moving. Every week of delay meant more Japanese fortification on the home islands. More time for Tokyo to prepare for the inevitable invasion of the mainland. Analysts were already projecting that figure. The invasion of Japan itself. Operation Downfall. Estimated American casualties, over 1 million. Some projections went higher. Against that number, Iwo Jima looked acceptable. That's the word that appears in the documents. Acceptable. 6,821 dead Marines. Acceptable. Measured against 1 million. The mathematics of catastrophe. But the Marines executing that strategy didn't see projections. They saw the man next to them take a mortar round. They saw a corpseman dragging bodies through sulfur mud. They saw 19-year-olds making decisions that no 19-year-old should ever face. Strategy looks clean on paper. It bleeds in the field. And the American strategy had its own critical flaw: the pre-invasion bombardment. 3 days of naval shelling that was supposed to neutralize Kuribayashi's defenses. Senior commanders requested 10 days. They were given 3, because the Navy had other commitments, other islands, other timelines. 3 days of bombardment against 18 miles of underground tunnels achieved almost nothing. The shells hit the surface. The defenders went deeper. When the Marines landed, the fortifications were essentially intact. 70% of Japanese firing positions survived the bombardment. 70%. The men on the beach had been sent in with incomplete preparation against a fully intact fortress, and the commanders knew the bombardment was insufficient. But the schedule didn't move. Because in war, the schedule is its own kind of god. Immovable, indifferent, hungry. The Marines would pay for that schedule with everything they had. Some of them would pay with everything they were. Day 5. Mount Suribachi is still breathing fire. The volcano dominates the southern tip of the island. 460 feet of hardened rock. Every tunnel on the island connects to it. Every sight line runs through it. Whoever controls Suribachi controls the battlefield. The Marines know this. Kuribayashi knows this. 4 days of fighting just to reach its base. 4 days of men dying on open ground with no cover and no mercy. The black sand offers nothing. No foxhole holds. Every crater fills with the next explosion. On the morning of February 23rd, a patrol of 40 Marines begins climbing. No massive assault. No air support. Just men. Moving up volcanic rock. Expecting to die at every turn. They reach the summit. The resistance is lighter than expected. Kuribayashi has pulled his best fighters deeper into the tunnel network. He's already abandoned Suribachi strategically. He knows what the Americans don't yet realize. The real battle isn't for the mountain. The real battle is for the northern plateau, for the airfields, for every ridge and ravine beyond. But the Marines on that summit don't know any of that. They find a piece of pipe. They attach a small flag. They raise it. The ships in the harbor see it. Horns sound. Men cheer. Across the beach, through the smoke and the blood and the exhaustion, something shifts. A signal. A symbol. Proof that the impossible is possible. A photographer named Joe Rosenthal raises his camera. He almost misses it. The first flag raising is smaller, almost informal, but a larger flag is found. A second raising is organized. Rosenthal positions himself. 6 men grab the pole. The shutter clicks. That single photograph will become the most reproduced image in American history. It will appear on stamps, monuments, posters. It will define the entire Pacific War in one frozen moment of collective effort and sacrifice. But here's what that photograph doesn't show. 3 of the 6 men in that image will be dead before the battle ends. The battle isn't over. It has barely started. Suribachi was the beginning, not the climax. 26 more days of fighting remain. The worst days. The bloodiest days. The flag is flying. The dying continues beneath it. Nobody talks about what happens after the flag. The photograph goes home. The image travels. America sees triumph. America sees heroes. America sees the war turning, bending, breaking toward victory. The men on the island see something different. They see the next ridge, the next bunker, the next man screaming for a corpsman who is already dead. They see their hands shaking at night, not from cold. The island is never cold, from something that has no name yet, something that lives behind the eyes and doesn't leave. Combat fatigue, the doctors call it. Shell shock. Operational exhaustion. They don't have a clean name for it because they don't fully understand it. Won't understand it for decades. The language of trauma hasn't been invented yet. These men carry it unnamed, undiagnosed, untreated. They carry it home. But on the island, in those 36 days, something darker happens first. Something that doesn't appear in the official histories. Something whispered between veterans 50 years later in quiet rooms. The sound. Veterans of Iwo Jima describe the sound before anything else. The mortars that came from everywhere and nowhere. The volcanic rock amplifying every explosion into something physically wrong. Something that didn't just hurt the ears but rattled something deeper. Something structural inside a human being. Men stopped sleeping. Not because they were afraid. Because sleep required a moment of vulnerability the island punished immediately. Snipers worked at night. Infiltrators moved through positions after dark. Closing your eyes was a decision that could end you. After 2 weeks, entire units were operating on almost no sleep. Decision-making collapsed. Reaction times slowed. Men made choices in those conditions that haunted them forever. And the Japanese defenders were experiencing their own psychological disintegration. Kuribayashi's plan demanded they die. Not retreat. Not surrender. Die in place. Sell every life for maximum American cost. His soldiers were not fighting for victory. They were fighting for the ritual of resistance itself. 2 armies, both breaking, both holding together through sheer psychological force. But one of them had nowhere to go. Kuribayashi's men were already dead. They just hadn't stopped moving yet. And the Marines fighting them couldn't always tell the difference between an enemy and a shadow. Between a threat and a memory. Between the island and their own minds. The battle moves north. This is where history gets quiet. Where the photographs stop. Where the famous flag fades into background noise and the real grinding horror of Iwo Jima begins. The meat grinder. That's what the Marines called it. Not a metaphor. A literal description of 3 interlocking Japanese defensive positions in the northern plateau. Hill 382. The amphitheater. Turkey Knob. 3 positions that supported each other perfectly. Attack one and the other 2 opened fire. Flank one and you exposed yourself to the third. There was no clean approach. No safe angle. No clever solution. Just men walking into fire. Repeatedly. Until enough of them survived long enough to take the position. Then the next position. Then the next. The 4th Marine Division spent 11 days on the meat grinder. 11 days for terrain you could walk across in 20 minutes. The casualty rate was staggering. Some rifle companies entered the northern campaign at full strength and emerged with fewer than a third of their men. Officers died faster than replacements arrived. Sergeants became de facto commanders. Corporals led platoons. Boys made decisions that generals trained for years to make. And they made them correctly. Often. Under conditions that should have made coherent thought impossible. That's the part that defies easy explanation. That's the part that lives outside the strategic debate about whether Iwo Jima was necessary. These men performed at the absolute limit of human capability. In volcanic heat. In sulfur air that burned the lungs. On terrain designed specifically to kill them. Against an enemy that refused to break. But here's the expansion that changes everything. Here's the layer underneath the heroism that the post-war narrative carefully avoided. The question of the bombardment doesn't go away. Internal Navy documents declassified decades later reveal significant disagreement before the invasion. Senior Marine commanders, including General Holland Smith, explicitly requested 10 days of pre-invasion naval bombardment. They were given 3. The reason was logistical. The Navy needed ships repositioned for the Okinawa campaign. The timeline was fixed. Holland Smith was furious. Privately, professionally, permanently. He believed the insufficient bombardment directly caused thousands of additional Marine casualties. He said so. In reports. In meetings. In his memoirs written years later with the controlled rage of a man who had watched his soldiers die for a schedule. Nobody was held accountable. The machine doesn't hold itself accountable. And then there's the deeper strategic question. The one that serious historians began asking in the 1980s and haven't stopped since. The justification for Iwo Jima rested on 3 pillars. Eliminate the Japanese radar warning system. Provide a fighter escort base for B-29 bombers. Create an emergency landing strip for damaged aircraft. The radar argument was valid. Japanese early warning from Iwo Jima was genuinely compromising bomber missions. Eliminating it had real operational value. The fighter escort argument was shakier. The P-51 Mustangs that were supposed to fly from Iwo Jima to escort B-29s over Japan flew fewer escort missions than projected. The operational reality didn't match the planning assumption. The emergency landing argument is the most contested. 24,000 emergency landings were recorded on Iwo Jima after its capture. That number gets cited constantly. It appears in speeches, in documentaries, in justifications. But military historian Robert Burrell challenged that figure directly. His research suggested the number was significantly inflated, that many of those landings were routine rather than emergency, that the actual lives saved by the emergency strip may have been far fewer than the lives lost taking the island. If Burrell is right, and the debate continues, then the strategic calculus of Iwo Jima collapses entirely. 6,800 dead Marines. For an island that may not have been worth the cost even by its own strategic logic. But here is the impossible position that creates. Here is the psychological trap that springs shut on anyone who follows this argument to its conclusion. If Iwo Jima was a strategic mistake, then what does that mean for the men who died there? Does it diminish their sacrifice? Does it hollow out the flag raising? Does it turn the meat grinder into something even more unbearable than it already was? The answer has to be no. It has to be. Because the Marines who fought at Iwo Jima didn't make the strategic decision. They executed it. With everything they had. With a courage that remains almost incomprehensible 60 years later. The mistake, if there was one, belongs to the men with the maps. Not the men with the rifles. And that distinction matters. Because one group came home to medals and monuments. The other group came home to silence. Or didn't come home at all. Day 36. The island is finally quiet. Not peaceful. Never peaceful. Quiet the way a wound is quiet after the bleeding slows. Something irreversible has happened. The evidence is everywhere. In the black sand. In the shattered rock. In the silence where 21,000 Japanese soldiers used to be. Nearly all of them are dead. Kuribayashi's plan worked. And failed. Simultaneously. He bled the Americans. He made them pay every inch in blood and time and psychological damage that would last generations. But the island fell anyway. It was always going to fall. He knew that before the first Marine hit the beach. He died on the island. Exactly as he intended. His final telegram to Tokyo was sent days before the end. It was formal, precise, utterly without self-pity. He apologized for failing to hold the island. He praised his men. He asked that Japan continue fighting. Tokyo promoted him posthumously to full general. It changed nothing. But the American collapse is quieter, less visible, more dangerous. The Marines who walk off Iwo Jima are not the same men who landed. Something has been taken from them that no debrief captures. No medical examination measures. No medal replaces. The 3rd, 4th, and 5th Marine Divisions suffered combined casualties that made Iwo Jima statistically the most costly battle in Marine Corps history. Nearly 1/3 of all Marines who landed became casualties. The 5th Division alone lost so many men it was effectively rebuilt from scratch afterward. Rebuilt. As if men are infrastructure. The survivors board ships. They move toward the next operation. Okinawa is already being planned. The invasion of the Japanese mainland looms beyond that. The war machine keeps moving because stopping means thinking, and thinking means feeling, and feeling means confronting what just happened on that island. So nobody stops. But the collapse is already happening internally. In the men who stare at the ocean and don't speak. In the ones who flinch at loud sounds. In the ones who sleep with their hands balled into fists around weapons that aren't there anymore. The island is secured. The mission is complete. The cost has been paid. But nobody has yet asked the question that will echo for decades. Was the invoice correct? 6 months later. August 1945. 2 bombs end the Pacific War. No mainland invasion. No Operation Downfall. No million American casualties that justified every brutal calculation from Leyte Gulf to Iwo Jima to Okinawa. The bombs fall on Hiroshima and Nagasaki and Japan surrenders, and the war ends with a signature on a battleship deck in Tokyo Bay. Clean, final, sudden. And somewhere in that silence, a question detonates quietly. If the bombs were always coming, if the invasion of the Japanese mainland was never truly inevitable, if the atomic program was already advanced enough in February 1945 to make Operation Downfall a contingency rather than a certainty, then what was Iwo Jima for? The strategic justifications don't disappear entirely. The radar elimination was real. Some emergency landings were genuine. The fighter escort missions, however fewer than projected, did happen. The island had operational value. But the million-casualty mainland invasion that made Iwo Jima's cost acceptable never happened. The denominator that made the mathematics bearable was removed from the equation entirely. 6,800 dead Marines. Against a mainland invasion that never came. Against an atomic bomb that was already being built while they were dying on that beach. Now here is the final twist. The one that cuts deepest. The one that reframes everything that came before it. The three survivors from the famous flag photograph. The three who made it home. Renee Gagnon, Ira Hayes, John Bradley. They were pulled from combat immediately after the photograph was identified. Sent home. Made into symbols. Toured across America selling war bonds. Performing their heroism for crowds who needed something to believe in. Ira Hayes couldn't do it. A Pima Native American who had volunteered to fight for a country that had taken almost everything from his people. He stood on those stages and smiled for photographs and said the right words and came apart slowly and completely from the inside. He died in 1955, alone, in the Arizona desert, 12 years after Iwo Jima. The symbol outlived the man. The photograph outlived the truth. The flag is still flying somewhere in a frame on a wall in a government building. The island is still there, mostly uninhabited, still smelling faintly of sulfur, still waiting, still keeping its secrets in 18 miles of tunnels that nobody has fully mapped. Some battles never end. They just go underground.